Hi, I'm Dylan Paris. I'm a musician, a YouTuber, I work in tech in my day job, and today I'm really excited to talk about the new 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros that Apple has just announced and are releasing next week. Actually, just a matter of days by the time you see this. This week's video is brought to you by Distrokid, and I'll talk about that more in just a little bit. The new MacBook Pros are one of the more exciting tech releases I've seen in a long time. If you've been keeping track of Apple's computers for the last year or so, they've really been knocking it out of the park. The M1 MacBook Air and MacBook Pro are both phenomenal machines. I've been using an M1 MacBook Pro myself for music stuff and an M1 iPad Pro for editing these videos, creating music, and doing all kinds of stuff, including capturing the video you're seeing here. When Apple announced their new silicon strategy, moving away from Intel chips and into their own ARM chips, they said it was a 2-year transition process. Last year was the entry level, and this year we got the second shoe drop, which is the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, which are going to be available in a 14 and a 16-inch MacBook Pro. And these computers are mind-blowing. The most exciting thing to me is the screen technology, actually. They've already proven themselves with their silicon, so more powerful CPUs and GPUs are great, but the Pro Motion XDR, as they call it, displays with mini LED dimming zones and 120Hz display. Developments like that are extremely exciting to me because it's going to really improve the process of creating videos, and I also believe the process of using music software. Before we get too far into this, first, consider liking and subscribing. To everyone who's subscribed already, I really appreciate you so much. The channel's growing exponentially. We're past almost 3,400 subscribers as of the time of filming, which is just so amazing, and I'm so appreciative of that. For anyone new watching, I make content like this regularly, and I mostly focus on music production, but I can dive into tech as well. Before we get too far into this MacBook Pro, let's talk a little bit about Distrokid splits. Here's some important information about Distrokid splits. In its most basic form, Distrokid Splits allows you to make sure that everyone involved in your project is getting paid. And you get to decide the percentages that they're getting paid, assuming that you're the main account holder and it's your track you're uploading. You can designate the proper split designation for each person. You can change this at any time. You can update it at any time. When a collaborator is getting money, they only see their percentage. They don't see the other percentages of other folks. You're also not going to be held up if you decide to invite someone to splits and they don't sign up before your release drops. Once they sign up, they'll get the money that's held aside for them. So it's on their own time, but it allows you to have that already set up from the get-go. If you're interested in Distrokid and you're not already a member, consider using my link in the description. This will get you 7% off a 1-year membership, and it will also get me a referral fee, so it's kind of a win-win situation. I've actually personally been a Distrokid member since around 2014. My current account and project, just Dylan Paris, is newer than that, but I've used Distrokid for a long time, because they simply are the best value, in my opinion and in my experience. They didn't ask me to say that, it just is true. So I do recommend following my link below, and if you want to see what Distrokid can bring to you, I recommend checking out my album There's Something Better, which is distributed via Distrokid. I use one of the higher tiers, which allows me to choose my record label and my release dates, which is really cool. But even for the minimum tier, you have the ability to do a lot of cool stuff, including splits. So check out Distrokid using the link below. And let's talk about this MacBook. So the M1 MacBook Pro and MacBook Air were already a huge upgrade from especially the previous Intel designs they'd had before. In my opinion, the M1 MacBook Air and MacBook Pro that they announced last year were some of the biggest, if not the biggest, generational leaps I'd ever seen in computing. The fact that these computers were so powerful and yet had such good battery life and were so quiet meant that a lot of people that make music wanted to go towards these devices. I did. My friend Jake Stein, aka Wronghouse, channel link below, music link below, he went with a MacBook Air and has been doing shows, outdoor shows all summer and into the fall, using the M1 MacBook Air as the brain of his setup. In my testing with my M1 MacBook Pro 13-inch, which I talked about a couple weeks ago, I have been able to run Machina, Logic, Ableton, and all of my plugins better than they were running on my Gigabyte Aero 15 laptop, which had a top-end i7 6 or 8 core processor, I think 8 core, and a ton of RAM. And yet, even on a minimum spec M1 MacBook Pro 13-inch, I was getting just phenomenal performance with just 8 gigs of RAM and the base model M1. However, when I bought that computer, I bought it refurbished for $1,100 because I was keeping up with the rumor mill and I knew that we were about to see even more powerful and substantial computers in the future. And last week we did finally see the announcement of the 14 and 16-inch M1 Pro and M1 Max MacBook Pros. And these are a pretty substantial upgrade again. Whereas the M1 Air and the M1 Pro 13 were internal upgrades using the same shells. These are a full hardware external redesign and internal upgrade. And what that means is that you're getting ports back. You're getting the SD card reader, which is huge. I've had to use SD card adapters when I film these videos this whole time, and it's so frustrating, whether it's the iPad or a Mac or any device that doesn't have that port. It can't really feel that professional when the primary video capture device that so many people use can't natively plug in. Along with that, you still have 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports. Thunderbolt 4 is a really awesome standard. It has huge capacity for bandwidth and is the same port that's on this M1 MacBook Pro. Having 3 of these is going to be huge compared to the 2 ports that are on the MacBook Pro 13 that I have. You also get HDMI 2.0, which I'm not sure I'm going to use a ton, but it's cool to see it back. Arguably more important is the shift back to larger, thicker designs for better thermal performance. When Apple redesigned the MacBook Pro in 2015, it sacrificed a lot of performance for a smaller footprint and a very svelte design. I've always been a fan of the physical appearance of that generation of MacBook Pros, including the Touch Bar, but they really suffered when it came to thermal throttling and performance because Apple overestimated what Intel could do, and Intel overpromised and underdelivered when it came to making high-performance, high-efficiency chips, specifically trying to get down from 14 nanometers to 5 or even 7. I don't even think they got further than 10, although that could be true now. Because of this, Apple decided to take the reins and develop their own chips, and we know how that story went. We had an amazing increase in performance even when emulating Intel apps last year, and we are about to see just a massive explosion of pro workflows and creation on these devices with the 14 and the 16-inch MacBook Pro. So I'm extremely excited about this as a musician, as a video person, and I wanted to talk about why I personally ordered the base model 16-inch MacBook Pro. This is the model that has the M1 Pro chip, not the M1 Max. However, it's already a substantial increase in power over the M1 that's in my MacBook Pro, and especially compared to the Intel models that these more high-end Pros are replacing, we're seeing huge performances, at least in Apple's shared specs, which will definitely be cross-examined probably starting Monday or Tuesday when the embargo lifts and more people have them in their hands. But we're expecting to see substantial improvements in CPU and GPU performance, which is really cool. Now, when it comes to music production, GPU is not a huge part of the experience. Where you really want to pay attention if you're looking into these machines is CPU performance and RAM. And I will say personally, for my workflow, 8 gigabytes of RAM on the base model M1 13-inch Pro was fine. So moving up to the base 16 gigs of RAM and a higher core and higher speed processor with the M1 Pro on the 16-inch MacBook Pro, I'm very excited about this because it just means that the ceiling for what I'm going to do is now higher. I actually mastered my album There's Something Better on a 16-inch Intel i9 MacBook Pro from 2019. That computer served me pretty well. It was extremely loud, and that was something I really didn't like about it. When I recorded some of my vocals, I actually recorded them into an iPad Pro with an audio interface and then brought those files over to the MacBook because I didn't want the fan noise in there. I'm hopeful that building off the M1 architecture means that these new, more powerful computers will also be quieter than the Intel machines they're replacing. And because they're more powerful, I'm actually expecting to be able to do similar isotope, ozone, neutron-based mastering with even more overhead in the CPU when using Ableton or Logic or other applications. So for me personally, especially because I also film YouTube videos and I've been editing them in LumaFusion on this iPad, which has been an okay experience, but I'm very much looking forward to the XDR mini LED display, 16-inch display, and going back to Final Cut Pro with this new machine. So that's a big upgrade for me, and it's why I wanted the 16-inch versus the 14-inch. It's not so much the power changes because I'm getting a base spec, it's more that screen real estate for editing and for being able to look at my video and not kind of have it hurt my eyes the way it can on a smaller screen like this. But that said, I'm sure that a lot of musicians and other creative types are looking at this announcement and wondering, do they need this machine? I think if you have an M1 MacBook Air or MacBook Pro from 2020, you very likely don't need to upgrade. In general, when it comes to computers, I would say the necessity to upgrade really only happens when you hit walls. And so if you find that your computer is doing everything you need right now, even if it's an Intel Mac, it may not be worth upgrading. Luke Miani had a great video where he talked about need versus want, or justifying. For me personally, because I only got half a terabyte of storage and 8 gigabytes of RAM on the 13-inch MacBook Pro, I kind of knew it was a stopgap computer for me. I need the additional storage so that I can do video and music work. I basically have already filled the half terabyte of storage on the M113 because I've installed Native Instruments Complete 12 and Arturia V Collection and Ableton Packs and Logic Pro expansions and software instruments it pretty quickly hits the threshold on what it can hold storage-wise and means that it's only been a music machine. I've still been editing my video on the iPad because I bought the 1 terabyte iPad because I thought they were going to bring Logic to it. That's a whole other story. So for me personally, getting more storage, getting the better screen, those are big upgrades for me. The CPU and GPU will be big as well. I'm mostly excited about that screen, and all the additional things are just kind of icing on top of the cake. However, if you're looking at buying a machine just for music production, I think the MacBook Air or the MacBook Pro, if you have really intense workflows, might be the way to go. These computers are going to keep going down in price because a new generation of machines are coming up, and that means you're going to be able to snag deals like I did, where you're getting a really powerful MacBook for $1,000, $1,100. If you look in the used market and the refurbished market, if you have a computer you can trade in, you may find really good deals. And that's part of how I'm upgrading to the 16-inch, is that I'm trading in this 13-inch directly to Apple. They're giving me $880, so I lose somewhere around 220, I think, total. But it's a simple process. I don't have to go in the aftermarket and meet someone in front of a Starbucks and just deal with all that. So it's kind of worth it for me. But if you're looking at should you upgrade, it's likely that you can do everything you want to do music-wise with an M1 MacBook Pro or MacBook Air. However, if the screen technology improvements are fascinating to you, if you do video work, if you love watching movies at night on your laptop, and you want those pure black levels from that XDR display, that's where the conversation gets more complicated. If you just want to do music stuff, especially if you're just plugging it into a dock and then using an external monitor, you likely don't need the new displays on these laptops, and you're already going to have the power you need on the M1 Air or the MacBook Pro. But if you do want an all-in-one machine the way I do, with the 16-inch, I can let my monitor just be for work, and I'll have a really nice screen for music creation and for content creation for my channel. To me, it's purchasing a whole package. If you don't need all those elements, then I think the M1 Air and MacBook Pro are still the way to go. Maybe you're thinking, well, what about the M1 MacBook Pro? Should I get that? It has, the same M1 chip that the other devices have. And personally, I've been really kind of disappointed in the power of this machine because of the limitations of iPadOS. Unless you're specifically wanting the world's most powerful iPad, then I would not get an iPad Pro versus a MacBook Air, Pro, 14, 16, or 13. And that's specifically because of the software available. There are developers doing just phenomenal work on iPad, and it's why I'm always going to have an iPad. I want to be able to make music with it and share my experiences with it, but if you're coming from PC or Mac, I don't think it's at a point where you can lose the high-powered DAWs like Logic, Ableton, or Final Cut, or Premiere, or DaVinci Resolve. These pro-level tools that you might need to run a YouTube channel or finish and finalize, mix, master, and create your music. You can do versions of that on an iPad, and this is kind of a larger conversation for another day. But I would say focus more on the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, and then get like a base model iPad Pro, or even the iPad Mini 6, which I'm extremely tempted to swap this one out for once I have this new MacBook. I really think the new M1 Pro and the M1 Max are just extremely exciting developments in technology for creators and users across the board. For musicians, the M1 Pro is going to be all you need. If you're doing intense graphics work or, really pushing the limits of what a computer can do, then maybe you do need the Max. But I think we're going to potentially run into thermal throttling issues, especially with the 14-inch. In my opinion, if you want an M1 Max, you should just get a 16-inch MacBook Pro. That's because the 16-inch has 45 more watts of available power in its power brick. Oh, the other thing to note, if you do go with the 14-inch MacBook Pro, upgrade the power adapter. For whatever stupid reason, Apple's decided to charge an upsell on getting the fast charge brick, the 96 watt or 95 watt, whatever it is, power adapter. You'll see that the base model comes with a 67 watt power adapter. You're going to want this other one, this 96 watt power adapter. They're both MagSafe, but the 96 is how you fast charge. So that's a little niche, but with the 16-inch MacBook Pro, you're just getting a 140 watt power adapter. You're getting the best experience possible. With the 14, they've decided to upsell you. It's not quite as bad as the $20 cleaning cloth or whatever, but it's still pretty whack. So keep that in mind. Anyway, thank you so much for watching today. I am so excited about the growth of this channel. I'm putting more work into the production of it, getting better lighting, filming this better, putting more time into editing, and I'm really starting to see that pay off. My last week's video, my review of the Machina Plus, hit 1,000 views in less than a week, which is really exciting, and has had a really nice response to it. The channel's been growing in a way I'm just so proud of, and that growth is because of you watching this on your phone, on your computer, or on your TV like I do. I might be weird, I just love watching 4K YouTube on my TV. I'm really excited to test out this MacBook Pro. I was able to get a pre-order in time to get it on Tuesday the 26th, and so I will be doing all kinds of video content with it, and I'm really excited to show you what is in store and what's possible with this thing, especially when it comes to music production. So if you want to see more videos like that, consider subscribing, and I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. I'll catch you soon. Thanks again to Distrokid. Again, link below if you would like to join the Distrokid community and have your music on all the platforms. All right, peace.